podcast role. Welcome in.
You're listening to an Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast, a proud member of the Podcast Role Network. Hello, Jamie.
Hello, Peter. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing all right. A lot going on right now. I'm sure for you as well.
Yes.
Hey, I do want to thank the people at Libsyn, though, just because I've been sending them nasty emails and stuff, but really helping me connect with Spotify to fix the Spotify link. So if you have been an Imperfect Leader listener and you've been accessing us on Spotify and then all of a sudden said, did they stop? What happened over the last 3 weeks? I will tell you that it has been fixed. So all our past episodes are back on there. So I know this is more of a public service announcement that everybody was dying to know about.
Well, they're
no,
right. You told me that folks in the town that you're headed to in Cartagena were like, oh, I can't do that.
Well, and the international folks I've been talking to around the world. I mean, our biggest listeners outside the U.S. right now are Singapore, Colombia, Spain, Australia, and I'm seeing that they're accessing on Spotify. So I was like, I don't want to lose our listeners. You got to help me fix this.
I'm grateful.
I did.
I'm grateful that it's fixed because I am going to plug myself and say, hey, anybody in any of those countries, if you want some support from me, I am happy to come to you.
APC is willing to travel.
100%.
That's right.
100%.
Have tools for success. Will travel.
Totally. You just start listening to those countries. I'm like, yes, please. Sure. Sounds great.
I love it. That's so funny. Well, I'm thinking about our guest today, Melissa Sadorf. Dr. Sadorf represents the Rural Education Association, right? The National Association of Rural Educators. And one of the things in particular that she is going to talk about in our conversation that you're about to listen to is really how important it is to be mindful of your rural school districts, for which there are so many that represent such a large part of our nation in terms of the U.S. And how often they're overlooked for suburban and urban/metropolitan districts. And so, the listeners who are listening to us, who are sometimes pretty isolated in their own right, they listen to us as a way to get community, to gain perspective, to think about problem solving. And that's exactly what Melissa does for her members throughout the entire country.
I mean, I've been lucky enough to work in a lot of rural schools and connected to a lot of rural leaders. Like she said, the majority of schools in the nation, in the districts in the nation, are rural. And there's some unique problems. In fact, I'm looking forward to. I feel like we can go right into it. I will say that I just got back. I just got back from a rural K-8 and was helping with this personal experience. You know this as a personal experience, but because you're Oakland and Columbia, Missouri. And, so your districts have been relatively large. This little K-8 has a serious master schedule problem. It's a challenge. It's a major issue because it's just they don't have the kid numbers are not consistent. The teacher numbers are small and the same. And creating a schedule that sort of reflects a both elementary and secondary model that is literally not designed for this type of school. Those two models, and that's what Melissa talks about, is that the way in which schools tend to be designed don't always work for the rural schools. It was such a great example. I just did it. I just was.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And brainstorming. What do we do about this? How do you?
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I do want to make one slight correction, which is in Missouri, the Rural Education Association is called MARE, the Missouri Association of Rural Educators. And for what Melissa leads is the National Rural Education Association. So NREA, not NARE. So just in case she's listening and going, I mean, come on. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You overlook me. You can't even get the acronym right. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Well, this is what I do want to say is that we do have a sponsor each week. And so we're grateful to IXL. And, when I was thinking about Melissa, that she will mention that rural leaders, they wear so many hats. But you shouldn't have to carry the burden of instruction all by yourself. And so IXL, it is a research-proven platform. It does take the load off your teachers. And the reason why it does that is because it's automated, it's personalized learning, and you can pair it with your district's unique story. That's what makes IXL pretty meaningful. And so you want to build progress, you want to move the needle, visit IXL.com/imperfect today. You are listening to an Imperfect Leader, the Superintendent and Leadership Podcast. I am Peter Stievelman.
And I'm Jay Malmanson, and we'll see you on the other side.
Yes, we will. Today on An Imperfect Leader, my guest is Dr. Melissa Sadorf, the Executive Director of the National Rural Education Association and a longtime advocate for rural schools. With more than 30 years of experience as a teacher, a principal, and a superintendent in Arizona, she now works in higher education, preparing the next generation of school leaders. Melissa is also the author of The Resilient Rural Leader and the host of the Rural Scoop podcast, where she elevates rural voices. Melissa, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Well, thank you, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I'm excited to have this conversation.
That's awesome. Well, I really appreciate it too. What I have found from conversations with Earl Franks at NAESP and David Schuler at AASA is that they're always traveling. They're always representing their organizations, and I imagine you're no different. So representing the National Rural Education Association can't be any different. So my first question for you is, where are you today, or where have you been lately?
Well, today I'm actually at home, and yes, you're right. There is a lot of travel involved. It's actually something that I looked forward to in this role because I enjoy meeting new people and traveling to new places. Where have I been is, first of all, NREA just had their annual Advocacy Day, which is our Hill Day. March 23rd through 25th, we were on the Hill with a group of rural superintendents and school board members and some state affiliate directors walking those congressional offices. And that was fantastic, well received. And it's nice to feel like you're able to change hearts and minds when you're able to tell stories about what's happening in rural education. And the people that were there really did feel like they were moving the needle. So that's always a good thing. The week before that, I was actually at the Nebraska Rural Schools Affiliate, their Coalition of Rural Schools Association, and spent some time with them there, did a breakout session on the Why Rural Matters report, which I know we're going to get to in a little bit here, and got a chance to see Nebraska and have a runza. I'd never been to Nebraska before, so
That's
I got
right.
a
That's
chance
right.
to
Everyone
see it.
talks about, yeah, cool.
Yeah. And apparently it's like a food group all on its own, and I understand the hype now. So that was fun.
Oh, well, that's good. I think that's the right answer, particularly since this episode is evergreen, right? So you want to make sure that everything in the affirmative in terms of regional foods and culture. That's right.
That's right.
Well, I was a superintendent in Missouri, and what I found from my colleagues, particularly from rural districts in Missouri, they were always the most innovative and the most collaborative.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering in some of these recent visits, whether it be your interactions in Nebraska, whether it be your colleagues from all over the country who were meeting in DC and talking on the Hill and advocating, what are some of the things that you're hearing that really are inspiring you?
Wow. The confidence that they have when they go into an office that the work that they're doing matters. It matters to the students. It matters to their families. It matters to the community at large. They're not asking for charity. They're asking for what students deserve, and they are able to tell that story well. And that's inspiring to me. The person that is a rural superintendent like I was, and like many are that wear multiple hats, and they're the superintendent, but they're also the principal, and maybe they're the curriculum director, and they run the bus.
I was going to say, when I was superintendent,
I
mean, our district was 19,000 students. We were a large district in Missouri. And then in the rest of Boone County, where my colleagues and we would meet probably once a month for lunch. And then, of course, in our regional meetings, the next district in terms of enrollment was about 1,000 and then 500 and 300. So they would arrive at our lunch meeting, and I just stood in awe of them. We had very similar and different roles in terms of what we did. And they would come in, well, had to fix the refrigerator in the cafeteria. Oh, had to drive the bus. Oh, I got to leave early because I'm now the driver for the sports team or the quiz bowl team.
Right.
I was always astounded by the many hats that they wore. Yeah. And then what I was always inspired by as well was their ability to really focus on, we always say about superintendency and leadership in general is really focus on a few things and do them well. And they were, I would say, ruthless in the best sense in terms of, because in a lot of ways they had to be, they couldn't offer everything in terms of, they would focus on a few things and then do it exceedingly well. Yeah. And so that was always for me an inspiration.
Yeah. Well, and the thing about rural leadership is you really have to, you can specialize in some things, certainly. And you need to, because you're usually the one that has to do it and you have to do it well. But at the same time, you're a generalist because the organizational chart is so flat that you have to be. You have to know a lot of things about a lot of things. And actually, I think it gives you a much better perception of leadership overall in a school district or in a school building, because you have to be the one that knows it, does it, monitors it, evaluates it, whatever
Yes.
those things
Right.
are.
Setting the
And,
tax
you have
rate,
to,
adopting new curriculum,
yep,
being the HR specialist. Each of those pieces I had to have, to some extent, some knowledge, but I had a team that ran that, and they were doing it all, which I think put them in a better position if they ever wanted to do something different, for which they
yes,
didn't. They didn't say, like, I'm not aspiring to be a rural, an urban, metropolitan, or suburban. This is who I am at the core. I want to be
yeah,
a rural superintendent. I think sometimes we confuse ourselves, or not you, I don't think, but those in leadership that think that there's a hierarchy that you're aspiring for a larger district or something
good
else.
point.
And I was always just, yeah, I stood in awe of them.
Yeah,
I wonder, can we talk about your book? Because you're
yeah,
the author of The Resilient Rural Leader. And
yes.
I have to imagine that you were very intentional about the word resilient. And so would you tell us about your book? What compelled
Yeah.
you to write it?
Yeah, I would love to. It really came from 30 plus years of living and leading in rural schools, watching what worked, what didn't, what never got named or celebrated. And as a new superintendent coming into the role, there was not like a guidebook. There wasn't anything as a resource that I could use to kind of give me okay, this is what to be thinking about. This is what kinds of things you should be doing or asking, or here you have a game plan of any kind. And so luckily I had a really supportive board president who knew that I was coming straight from the principalship to the superintendency. I didn't have any district level experience. And she ensured that I had a mentor, which happened to be the previous superintendent, who, because she was willing to do that, I had a mentor for 2 years. I was the business manager, I was the federal and state grants program director, I was the HR director, all of those things. And I had somebody that could show me how to do all of those things. Most superintendents don't, especially in a rural community. And so what I did with this book is I wanted to ensure that people that were coming new into the role that may or may not have had the experiences or the background to lead in these different departments that they were responsible for could tap into some basic information that
Gotcha.
then at
So
least
someone
they
who
had
walks in
an
and says, they're talking to me about supplant versus supplement. I don't even know what they're talking about.
Yeah,
They're talking
exactly
about, yeah.
right.
Okay. Okay.
The book title that was my working title was You Have the Keys, Now What? And I changed that because the more I got into the writing of it, rural leaders really do have to be resilient. And for somebody that's actually done the work, they understand what that means. Nobody is going to save you. And not necessarily that they want to be saved, but you have to do with what you have. You have to look at the assets in the community that you find yourself in and put something together that meets the needs of students and staff.
Why do you think that you said something like it's a lonely job, and part of me was, oh, no one's going to come save you, is what you said. And so then it made me think, why is that? Is that because in some cases you are geographically isolated from your partner district, from the person next door? Or is it because, like so many in leadership, you're the only one who does that job? And so you're trying to figure it out by yourself if you don't have a mentor or an association to reach out to and call? What is it that makes you feel like there's no one that's going to come save you? What did you mean by that?
Yes and yes. Yes, there is geographic isolation, especially for our remote or frontier districts. And that means that the people that you have are the people you have to solve the problem. And the answer is usually there. You have the school community, you have the community at large, you might have business partners or other organizations that can come alongside and support. But at the end of the day, you're the one that has to make sure that things are running and running well. There is a loneliness factor in any superintendency, but it's exacerbated in a rural position where there aren't people that are right across the street in the district next door to you that you might be able to tap into or form a coalition with or do some thought partnering with. You have to be really intentional about how you structure your network of support. And it's not always a local network of support.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because in the district where I was, many generations of Boone County residents in Columbia, Missouri. And so you had to be mindful of the connections that people had to each other as you may be seeking a thought partner, just to kind of explore an idea, not to say that this was something I wanted to do. And then all of a sudden you'd find that potentially that was shared with somebody else who then shared at a church. And then all of a sudden on Monday morning, you have a lot of questions about something that was just an exploratory idea. And I imagine, to use your word, exacerbated, that can be in a smaller community where your board member might also be related to a teacher in the district.
Yeah, multiplex relationships are
Ooh,
what
I
those
like
are
that.
called. Yeah, where there's just so many layers of relationships that you're navigating. And not just as a superintendent, but potentially as a member of the community yourself. And so you have these strands of people that connect in really strange and interesting ways. And you do have to know. I mean, one of the things
Yes.
that
Oh my gosh. One of my colleagues told me about going to he was just buying a bottle of wine because they were having a meal. And somebody sort of called a board member and said, well, I'm not sure he should be. That's
Right.
appropriate.
Or they
And
went dancing. Yeah, same thing. Should they be drinking and dancing? I don't know. But yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. You are always on stage, and you are anyway as a leader. You're always held up as a model. People look to you for how are you navigating this situation or how are you behaving in this context. But at the end of the day, in a rural community, you are really always on. And that's one of the things that when people come into a rural place and they take a position that and they're not from a rural background, they don't have a full understanding of what rurality is. And those multiplex relationships and the hidden undercurrents in a community that you may not know are there really are something that you have to be prepared for. And one of the things that I like to say NREA does, or that this book does, is it points out, pay attention. Know who the people are that are the movers and shakers in the community. Know who the mavens of information are so that you have just at least some basic background of who you should talk to when you have a question about should
Yes.
I not, or should I, maybe is this a good idea for this school community? So
someone referred it to me as either the tribal or the community elders of your community. Who are those people to sort of seek out
Absolutely.
and learn to get a beat on your system, as well as historically, or as a rural superintendent in Texas recently told me on our podcast from Very Best, Texas. That's the name of the town, Very Best. She says, we are the very best. And she said, a reminder of, don't move the fences until you know why they were put in.
Yeah,
Or don't move the
absolutely.
posts until you know why they were put in. I went, oh,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
That's really smart. Well, if you're just joining us, my guest today is Dr. Melissa Sadorf, Executive Director of the National Rural Education Association and a longtime champion for rural schools. Melissa, the NREA publishes the Why Rural Matters report to share key data on the state of rural education. And I'm glad you referenced that earlier on in our conversation. For those who are listening, I always send sort of a little script ahead of time, just so you know what I'm thinking about asking. So you sort of pulled the curtain back on our process here, which is totally great. So, but tell us, why is it critical to have a specific rural research agenda when trying to influence national education policy? And I guess if you can talk a little bit, you talked about the Hill and your visit most recently in terms of advocacy. I think this sort of all goes into that.
Absolutely. So I'll start with saying that most national education or most national research is designed around urban and suburban school contexts. And the assumptions that are baked into methodologies or sample sizes or outcome measures really don't always translate to rural communities. So without a specific rural designed research agenda, rural schools are always being compared to a standard that they were never designed to meet, and therefore will always come up short. In 2022, NREA put out its most recent national research agenda. It is a 5-year action plan that centers this particular one that starts in 22, and it's actually going to be ending in 2027. We're in the process of starting focus groups for our next iteration of our agenda. But this particular one really centers spatial and educational equity. And that's the idea where you live shapes your educational opportunity in ways that are really fundamentally different from class or race alone, even though those often intersect. The Why Rural Matters report is based on that. And what that does is it's a look at data from all 50 states, because all 50 states do have rural schools in them. It puts data in policymakers' hands and advocates' hands so that when you walk into your local or your state or your congressional office and you say, here's what's happening with rural schools in my district or my state, the conversation is really settling you into the national conversation, the national perspective of what's happening. It's really designed to be a tool so that you're able to take that and pair it with the stories from your district and really personify, this is a data point, here's what it looks like on the ground.
When
And
you,
and when you pair those two things together, data by itself is pretty dismissible, and a story by itself can be forgettable. But when you pair those two things together, that's really where you start changing minds and you start changing hearts about what's possible for rural students in rural schools.
That's a really good advice, I think, for all different contexts in terms of school leadership, in terms of being able to share what does national data say, and then how does that pertain to your local community? How are you seeing it bear out in your own local community? For those who are listening, you might have it on right at the tip of your fingers in terms of the number of students there in the United States and what percentage of them are attending school districts that would be considered rural districts?
Yeah, there are 10 million students in the country that are considered rural students, and that's about 20% of the population of the United States.
Yeah, that's a sizable number. That
it is. And people don't realize that because you have small school communities, but when you put them all together, they're a pretty sizable
That
group.
is a
One
mighty
in
force.
5 is a rural student.
Yeah.
As far as the number of schools, over half of the school districts, the schools in the country are considered rural. So you're talking about smaller schools, smaller systems of 1,000 students, 500 students, 50 students that make up that 10 million.
And that is a really good way to sort of put it, I think, into context. For those who are listening, and certainly when you're on the Hill, to say 50% of the school districts in our nation would be are considered rural. And so this is why we need to care. This is why having a report like this is super important. I'm kind of curious when you talk about also understanding the context of your place, which only then I think raises the importance of, as you likely have been hearing, the sort of push for place-based learning, to sort of take your place and take your space and have that be where children are also considering the environment in which you live. And so not to be restricted by the four walls of a classroom and to be reading about, I would say, New York City if you're in Fargo, and then even if you're outside of Fargo, to be like, why does that matter? What matters to me is what is happening in my own community. And that I think leads to my next question, which is, just to back it up a little bit, I have a leadership model that I use when I advise others, and there are 3 dimensions, and one of them is the leader's learning work. And inside that dimension, there are a number of terms, and one is the word resilience, and I chose that obviously because of your book, and so it's about supporting resilience. And in the podcast that you lead, that you host, the Rural Scoop, you've explored the concept of the hard work of staying, the resilience of rural communities despite economic and demographic shifts. So this, I think, brings me back to this idea of place-based learning and being grounded and anchored to your place of where you live.
Sure.
I wonder if you could share an example of a rural district that's really successfully used its school as a hub for that community revitalization and or to avoid that sort of not recidivism, but the sort of brain drain that happens sometimes where graduates think that their only options are to leave their community, where they know that truly if they could stay, they would, because that's home, that's heart, that's love, that's where they are from.
Yeah. Well, let me start by saying that the rural school is not just an educational institution. In many communities, it's the largest employer. It's the only public gathering space, and it truly is the community's identity and future. There's pride. Oh, I went to the high school, or my grandparents went to the high school. So there's that community pride. And that's certainly something that leaders need to understand, is that they're not just educating the community's children, they are anchoring to the community while they do it. The community school model, which is really what you're talking about, and the place-based education, as rural schools, we were the original community school, because everything flows to and from the school in a rural place. And so you do have resources, you do have supports, you do bring in the assets from the community in terms of the people and the geography and the businesses or the faith-based institutions that are around you. Maybe there's a community college that's nearby that can partner around dual credit or AP offerings, or CTE programming. You mentioned that the school is typically the largest employer, so they are an economic development part of the community at large. And the thing that comes to mind probably for most people is CTE programming when it comes to place-based education. You have a CTE model that is typically set up with the businesses in the local community. So for example, if you're in Missouri, you're probably looking at ag, right? Ag and dairy. And so the CTE program pathways are going to be communicating from the school to the local dairy or to the ag
That's right.
industry. That's
Right. And it
area.
may even include aerospace because they're learning how to use drones to
That's
map
right.
out the
Computer
plots of
science.
land and computer science. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I've heard people talk about drones and they're like, oh, for military? I go, oh no. I mean, they're talking about how do you map out the very best way that obviously there's within when you're planting your crops and your tractors now are so high tech that you could just sit in it while it maps it all out and then decides
That's exactly right.
this place and
Or
you can
or
use
you're playing a game. You've got a handset and you're controlling where the fertilizer goes or
Amazing.
those kinds of things. It's
Yeah.
crazy. But you're right. It's one of those things where technology has become infused in just about every industry that we're talking about. And that includes some of those rural CTE programs. So that's, I think, probably the most visible way that you have community involvement or place-based education. Another one at a middle school or an elementary school, you can have a school garden. And not only are you able to get out and learn about soil and life cycles and climate change or those kinds of things, you're growing food that the community can benefit from. It becomes a club that can give back
love
to the
it.
community.
Of course.
And it can be used in a culinary program for you can have a farm to table kind of situation going on with your cafeteria where students actually get to eat for lunch the produce that they've grown.
Oh, I love it.
All
Made me
of
think
those
also,
kinds
I
of
mean,
things are
the
possible.
different insects or, so
Yep.
monarch butterflies who, then it becomes a way station for them as they migrate or
Yep.
certain,
Or bees.
or bees, right? Yeah. Oh, that's
Yeah.
so cool. Yeah. Also made me think about your advocacy work on the Hill and why it's so important when you talked about it could be the largest employer, it could be the community's identity. And there are some from suburban and urban communities that think that's just inefficient. Why would they have those two districts? Why don't they just consolidate? And how you have to fight, literally, I think, or at least advocate strongly that you're talking about the erasure of a community's identity. So
Yeah.
their football team, their marching band, their locally elected board.
Right.
When you consolidate, that fundamentally changes how a community sees itself.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And there's been a lot of research on the impact of a school closure and consolidation on a rural community. If you don't have a strong school, the community typically is on its way to dying in one form or another. It tracks, and I'll tell you, one of the things that we look at too is the healthcare industry, because they track if you don't have a strong healthcare system, whether it's medical clinic or it's some kind of services available, that can also have a huge impact on the community. But the school as the anchor is really, that's the canary in the coal mine. When your school starts to falter, your community is often not far behind. It doesn't pull new families with children. And if there's not a place for them to go to school and they have to drive 45 minutes to the next town over to drop their kids off, well, that might not be an option for that town, might not be an option for that family. So it truly has a huge impact on a local area.
Thank you for sharing that. I'd like to ask you a question I ask every guest who comes on our program. How does the term an imperfect leader resonate with you?
Deeply. I think that the myth of the perfect leader has done tremendous damage to people that are aspiring to be leaders, especially in a rural school. Because as a rural leader, you're always on, like I said, there is absolutely no margin for pretense. The community knows that leader as a whole person, typically, not just as the leader, not just as a title. You can't be polished all the time, and you shouldn't be, because you're going to the grocery store, you're sitting in the pew on Sunday with them, you're going to the Little League baseball game on Wednesday night. And so I think those moments of transparency about uncertainty or mistakes or growth that you're experiencing as a leader, I think those are the moments that really develop the deepest sense of trust with your staff or with your board or with the community, because truly imperfection, in my opinion, is the currency of credibility. It's really not a liability. Especially in a rural education setting, it means that you show up anyway, even when the budget is impossible, or that the staffing positions that you're trying to fill just don't have any applicants, or when the state capitol has forgotten that you exist. You still show up as a human being. You're not a performer. You're a leader. And so, I think that is really, that model is just a beautiful way to encapsulate that. It's a culture of deep learning, which is what you talk about, is only possible when you have a leader that's willing to be a lead learner. And that means not having all the answers all the time and not getting it right the first time out the gate.
So I want to talk a minute about the Mosaic Project. It is one of our favorite organizations and has over 25 years of experience empowering students to really celebrate differences, communicate assertively, and resolve conflict peacefully at their outdoor school. I happen to have experience being part of the Mosaic Project, and so I can absolutely tell you it's an amazing organization. Their innovative SEL curriculum is now available to our Imperfect Leader audience. And so you can get a 10% discount through their new documentary film-based Mosaic Classroom Project. So just let the people know during your onboarding process to receive that 10% discount is to just mention an Imperfect Leader. Learn more about the Mosaic Project at mosaicproject.org.
When leaders think in systems, they think differently. They see the big picture, making decisions that create coherence and strengthen communication across their teams. They build adaptability, flexibility, and engagement. Every day, school leaders face complex challenges, from student engagement to staff alignment. What if your team could see those challenges as part of a bigger picture? That's what happens when you think in systems. It's how leaders turn complexity into connection and challenges into opportunities for growth. At the Waters Center for Systems Thinking, we help educators and organizations build this capacity, developing the habits and tools that turn vision into action. Think differently, think in systems. Sign up for our webinars, free resources, or a consultation by visiting our website, which you can find in the show notes.
We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. And my guest today is Dr. Melissa Sadorf, Executive Director of the National Rural Education Association and the author of The Resilient Rural Leader and the host of the podcast, The Rural Scoop. Okay, so in this segment, just every week, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision they made, and then we just kind of discuss it. So, Melissa, what happened?
So my after action review, I love that, by the way, is really about leading through declining enrollment. And I'm coming at this from 2 different perspectives because it's impacted me in 2 different districts. So the first, as a principal, I was tapped to lead a school closure. And as a superintendent, I navigated declining enrollment for the entire 12 years that I was a superintendent with the district, including a RIF in my first year, after my first year, and 7 failed override elections to try to mitigate the losses that we were having from our budget impact with that declining enrollment figure. So that's really, that's where I'm coming from.
That is heart-wrenching. Oh my gosh. I'm thinking you're early in your superintendency. You are having to either previously as a principal, having to oversee declining enrollment, and then certainly as a superintendent, the closing of a school is the most heart-wrenching decision one can make. The going to the community and asking for an override and not taking it personally when they say no, because they're going, we recognize that you have this situation and we're hurting too. We're struggling too.
That's right.
And wow. Okay. This, I think, is one of the more pertinent conversations right now, because overall, throughout the nation, we are hearing about declining enrollment and the just absolute difficult and heart-wrenching decision to have to close a school.
Yeah.
Okay. What got overlooked as you look back on these decisions or these experiences?
Let me talk about the school closure first.
Please.
I underestimated, and I'll just be honest with you, I underestimated how personal it was going to feel to the community. And I was thinking logistics, communication plans, transition timelines, making sure that people's classroom stuff got to the next room that they were going to be in when they went to a different school building. The community was grieving, and I knew that was going to be the case, but I didn't realize the depth. That school closure was obviously not just an administrative decision. It was the loss of a place where people could gather, where there was activities happening, where parents watched their kids walk across the stage at promotion.
Yeah, I can imagine also when a beloved teacher or community member has passed, they may have even had a
Yes.
funeral there. They may have had a
Yep.
memorial there. And so you're closing that.
Yep.
not you.
Well, I mean, I was the
You were the
face
face of it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that I think was one of the things that I didn't get right. I might have, in looking back on it, moved too quickly through action that I needed to get done because I had 6 months to figure out how to close the school and where everybody was going to go and how to ensure that people got to places that they really wanted to be.
Oh, that's such a
And
difficult position to inherit. Oh my.
it was. But I should have spent more time just simply acknowledging what was being lost before we really started doing the nitty-gritty about what comes next. So I wish I could
Okay.
have done that over again.
Yeah. So, okay, so the excelling in the technical side of everything, the logistics side of things, and on the human-centered side was an area that you wished you
Yeah.
had been able to pay more
Just
attention
spend
to,
a
or at
little
least
bit more
understand.
time on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how is that similar from or different from the experience as a superintendent?
So, well, there were two things that were involved with the loss of student count. The first was the rift. And that was hard.
Yeah.
There was no structure in place. It had not been done before. So this was a new thing for the district.
Oh my. So,
So I
I've
had
heard
to
about this,
create a
but not here.
structure.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah. I had to create a structure that everyone understood and then work through that with the staff. And I did have a couple that were planning on retiring anyway. And so it was easy for me when I could lose through attrition. But there were a couple of people that in the process of looking through the rubric and doing some evaluations and talking with the staff, each individual member, that I ended up having to say, we're not offering you a contract. Our plan is to not offer you a contract. That's what I'm recommending to the board. And again, I was efficient. I probably could have sat longer with the people that actually had to live with the RIF. On the override and other override elections, and that was 7 different override elections that we kept going out to the community because it continued to be an issue that we wanted the community to know about and potentially assist with a financial commitment to the district. And I kept assuming if we made a better case, if we showed better data, if we had better stories, that maybe the outcome would be different. Again, it was not a matter of the community having lost faith in the institution of the school.
That's my impression.
It was that they did not have the capacity to assist in that way, and they were not prepared to be able to make that commitment. And so it was tough. And for myself, it was a toll on me and it was a toll on the staff who felt like the community was not necessarily backing them, even though that's not what it was about. So, that slow erosion over time where you lose, I had to make sure that we were stepping back and taking care of morale and making sure that they understood the community is not against you because they didn't vote for this.
That is an almost impossible scenario in terms of how do you build morale with a repeated sort of drip, the loss of students, the loss of elections, and it's not about buying lunch or doing donuts those are not morale boosters. They're sort of a temporary moment of I see you and I recognize you, but they're not, they don't sustain you.
That's
right.
right.
So what are ways that you did it or that you've seen others sort of really sort of build up that, or at least try to build that morale up?
Well, for us, it was ensuring that the community was in the school. So it was having community days like a carnival or a recognition of veterans on Veterans Day or those, bringing the community in so that there was that connection to what we were doing and what they were seeing, and being able to have appreciation on both sides of that equation, which
not just one-sided, but for your teachers to understand the real struggles that some of your families were having. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, that's smart. What did you learn about relationships? And I think you've just spoken to that to some extent, how you're building relationships, but I'm curious, what did you learn about them?
Well, obviously that relationships are fundamental. They're the things that matter most anyway, but especially when you have declining enrollment in terms of either as a principal or as a superintendent, you have to ensure that relationship is in place with the people that are most directly affected, whether it's the teachers that are getting laid off or the families whose schools are being closed or the kids that don't have a particular program because we don't have the budget for it. The families who showed up when we had our school closure celebration, because we did celebrate the school as it was being closed.
Oh, that's a really novel idea. I hadn't thought
Yeah,
about that.
we
Right.
we celebrated it because it was a community anchor, and the families were able to walk the halls one last time.
That had to have
Those
been emotional. Oof.
conversations, oh my gosh, they changed how I view school closure forever. And those conversations are things that I know will have an impact on me for the rest of my career, because it was hearing in real time how impactful the school was. Not just the teachers, not just the events, not just the curriculum, not just the
Here's where I skinned my
certificate.
knee. Here's where I had,
Yeah.
my first my first friend who had just moved to town. This is
Yep.
where, wow.
That's exactly right. I think the other thing that I learned about relationships is you learn very quickly who your real allies are as it relates to whether it's your board members or it's your community leaders, especially when we were trying repeatedly for an override. And it wasn't necessarily because they thought we would win, although there was always that hope, but it was because they believed that the school was worth fighting for. And so that showed me something as well, is that when you are really in community with your community, when you are reaching out and supporting in whatever way you can, even when the override doesn't pass, they want the school to succeed. It's important for them that the school succeeds.
Yeah, that had to have been an
And
agonizing vote when one voted no. You want to make it as agonizing as possible,
Yeah.
I guess, in that sense too.
well, and honestly, I formed unexpected relationships with people who voted against us. I mean,
wow.
conversations that started as conflict and ended up as understanding were important. I mean, they may not have agreed about having a secondary tax, a property tax, but they did have an understanding, a genuine understanding of what we were trying to protect and what we were trying to do. And we had an understanding of what they were afraid of, because they were an older couple on a fixed income and they just could not afford that. So there was really, I think, some relationship building that happened there too.
Boy, you're really modeling it, particularly at this moment in time in our nation's history, the real importance of, even if we see things in radically different ways, the value of coming together in community. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say the other thing that showed me is that relationships around a school community are often not just about the school, but they're about the continuation of trust and respect. And so we want to make sure that we're protecting that so that it doesn't erode over time. I mean, we could have very quickly lost trust and respect with our community going back 7 times.
Yes, exactly. You're here again?
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, we're back.
Yeah, we're going to try it again.
We're going to try again. What could you have done differently? I'm sure you've thought about this over the years.
Yeah. On the school closure side of things, I wish I could have, and I was constrained by the timing of the superintendent's decision to release
6
that
months is-
information
oof.
to the public. I mean, we found out in December the school was going to be closed by June. The new school year starting July 1, we were all going to be in different
important to note,
buildings.
you had to preside over it. It wasn't as if you had decided to do it.
Correct.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would have left more room for grief before moving to the solutions right away. And I know that it was treated often by me and by the staff as a logistics issue, and that's not ideal. And it's not an excuse, quite frankly, that we only had 6 months. We could have been more intentional about the engagement with the community. I would have also created more than just the one celebration to say, for the community to come in and have a time to really feel like part of a good send-off to the memory of the school, something that honored the school before we locked the doors the last time. That would have been something looking back, I would have done more intentionally. On the override elections, I think I would have stopped running campaigns. But maybe spaced them out. But I think, again, just a continuing conversation, not just right before the election, but really as soon as the election happened, then starting the conversation over. And obviously the campaign is about winning a vote, but the conversation is about continuing the relationship and continuing to build trust. And those are very different things. And they're very different strategies for how you approach your community when you need something. So I would have probably done that differently.
Yeah,
So.
that makes sense. In the end, because every experience provides an opportunity for us to grow and then to subsequently make different decisions in the future. What would you say was something that was good that came out of the situation?
I think I became a more honest leader. I mean, you can't walk through that kind of sustained difficulty, whether it's with a school closure or it's multiple years, 12 years of declining enrollment, without getting very clear on what you actually believe and what you're actually willing to stand for. And you talk about resilience. I learned that resilience isn't because there's an absence of loss. It's really what you build in the presence of loss. And that conviction really is what became part of the conversation in my book. Every leader that I have mentored since, I do some instruction. I'm a professor at Northern Arizona University. And every leader that I've mentored since, every conversation that I have had with a potential superintendent or principal is really what does it mean to live through strife and decline rather than just growth, because it's a richer conversation when you can see what is potentially on the other side of an opportunity to grow as a leader, as a community, as a school, as a staff. And I've had the opportunity to do both with at least those two districts. So
Brilliant. Our guest today was Dr. Melissa Sadorf, Executive Director of the National Rural Education Association and a longtime champion for rural schools, as you can totally hear. Two takeaways that I had today. As you were summarizing a moment ago, you talked about being an honest leader. You really spoke about being a vulnerable leader. And both of those, in addition to everything that you've shared today, and I'm going to love and continue to use this phrase of, it really builds that currency of credibility. Thank you so much for sharing your story and for being a part of our podcast today.
I was happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
We are back.
All right. Let's get into it. What
Can I start? Yeah, can I
yeah, go
actually
for
start
it.
with something? Because
Sure.
this has been on my mind, particularly after re-listening to the conversation, and that is how much I stand in awe of rural superintendents. Oh my gosh, they do everything. They do everything that a large superintendent, superintendent in a large district is responsible for in terms of being the community leader, the civic leader, the face of the district, all of that. And at the same time, there were so many things I was not expected to do. And they're probably grateful that I wasn't expected to do that, because when as I mentioned in the conversation, I would get together with the Boone County superintendents pretty regularly. And sometimes they would be late because they were fixing the bus or repairing the refrigerator or driving buses or meeting with, it was just, it was like, we're doing the same and different jobs. And the different part was that they were taking on even more responsibility. So I just want to sort of, again, just stand in awe of what they're able to do and not lose sight of that.
That's a loud and clear, right? We've talked, and you and I talked about in other episodes about that, like, I remember working in one district here in California in the Valley where a superintendent regularly was the person who mowed the lawn. Right. And partially because he liked it. So I don't want to say, there's only one person that could ride the the riding mower. But I thought, well, that's right. He's got more than one job.
Sure. Right.
And
HR. I tell you, we need to hire a third grade teacher, and HR would work on it. They would post it. They would screen the applicants. They would bring people forward. The principals would. They're doing that. Oh, we have to set the tax rate, which is a really complicated formula. Sure. Superintendents, they will do it. They may reach out to a financial institution to help them kind of think that through, or the association within their own state, but they are the ones doing it and explaining it to their board and their public. I think it's remarkable.
The thing that I want to connect to it that she talked about that I thought was interesting in relation to a small district, and you've mentioned this about, because I have not been a superintendent, that you're the most famous person in a community, right? In this one little pool. And this takes it to a different level. The fact that what did she said? Let me read the quote. They are all multiplex relationships. There's so many relationships, so many layers to the relationship that you're navigating. You're not just the superintendent, but you're literally a member of the community yourself, in that people are seeing you at the grocery store and questioning what you're purchasing. Oh my goodness.
I remember the superintendent who reminded me that he had to go buy his booze in a different town. Because someone thought it was inappropriate that he was buying it, I think, on a Sunday. It was like...
Exactly. And That's part of what it means to be that person, the lead in this, to everybody's expectation of what they think you should be, who you should be, and how you should be is being laid on you. That's part of that's what goes with the job.
Yeah.
So I really like that reflection. Can I ask one other sort of side note question?
Sure.
You use so many hats. How many hats do you actually wear? You're one of the few people
I know
who
one
wears
today,
a
I don't
lot
have
of
one in.
hats.
Look at this. I don't even
physically,
have one
but
today.
what
I know.
hat? What's an HR hat? What does that look like? There's
Yes.
no good hat for HR. There's no good hat for some of these things. I guess there's a
Like
bus
facilities
driver
is a
hat.
hard hat, and athletics is a baseball hat. HR,
Why is athletics a baseball hat? Why not?
well, it
I
could
don't
be a
know.
football helmet. Or,
My track coach used to wear the big sun hat.
good. Yeah, that's
Track
good.
meets are long.
They are. And it's one race. I remember when my kid in 8th grade was on the track team, and you haul all the way down and drive all the, it's like the marching band. You drive 3 hours to watch them play for 15 seconds and then they're done. So, okay.
I love track meets. I'm a track dad. Love track.
God, no.
It was great.
God.
Track meets are like
Yeah.
carnival days. Everybody, especially if your kid is doing multiple events, that's the thing. Yeah, if they're only
I
running
do
100,
enjoy the hammer or whatever. What is it? The
Hammer throw? The
for-
discus?
yeah, or what is it? The one where it's gonna a ball, like a really heavy ball at the end, and then they're
it's the hammer.
turning in.
It's the
Yeah,
hammer
okay.
throw.
And they're just. But at middle school, they get very dizzy and like they're throwing it in, throwing it backwards, and throwing it. And thank God there's a cage.
No joke. Thank God.
It's just wild.
Exactly. Exactly.
You're
That
you're like,
and
look
jab.
out! Look out! So that
Kid
was
literally
kinda fun.
throwing a spear.
Exactly. Exactly. I do want to bring up something that I know rural districts are struggling with, are constantly feeling the pressure. So I was in Michigan, I don't know, just a few months ago for a conference, and there was someone who's representing one of the associations, and he was talking about 300 school districts in Michigan. There are 518 in Missouri. Florida has very few, actually. They have 100,000 kids in each of them. This, for rural districts in particular, who see a declining enrollment and this pressure to consolidate. And that's the one that we talked about, and it still stays on my mind.
Mhm.
Because you lose potentially your football team,
Yeah.
or your marching band, or your locally elected board. And so when you consolidate, it fundamentally changes the character of your community. And yeah, there are no good answers because it can increase the opportunities and offerings you can do. Although I believe Moser would say, like, you don't need to consolidate necessarily to be able to achieve that. It does require school districts to begin really coordinating and collaborating together. And to me, this is why I was so excited about this conversation, is because you're talking with somebody who is really traveling the country and really listening and learning, and then bringing that message back to federal level, why legislators should care about their rural districts. Because where are your farms? Where are you? You're going to lose your communities. They're going to shrink when there are no opportunities back in your hometowns. So how do you do that in a way and think of it from a systems thinking way? So this to me was one of the more exciting conversations because it really amplifies the need and the importance of paying attention to your districts that are in rural America, rural wherever. But yeah, it's rural America.
I wanted you to ask her about the tension point there. There is a tension in the consolidation conversation when the community isn't thriving the way it used to, or it's aging and there aren't kids for the school to survive. What's the argument for the school to survive? I'm interested to know, not from I understand the community, the community wants.
It's the community question. It's not the school needs to survive because it's often the biggest employer in town. It is the connection that people have. And so the school has to survive. And so then it has to rethink its offerings so that it can attract businesses. And it's just understanding how they're all connected to each other. And when
This is the tension that I wanted you.
Yeah, you wanted me to ask more about? Yeah.
I just want to dig into that. I think that's really, sometimes I feel like people are digging their heels like, no, we're unique. We want to keep our football team. And I'm like, yeah, you don't have enough players to even field a team.
Yeah.
And so
no, I hear that. I thought we got into a little bit, but I could see where continuing to have this, when you see how schools are part of this connection to rural hospitals, you're seeing their disappear to your other local factories, the communities, the churches, the child care centers, all of them are connected to each other, and they have to figure out how to do that together, and that the schools aren't making decisions in isolation from the others and vice versa. And so,
Yeah. I think it's
I
interesting
mentioned the football
because-
team and the marching band because that is an emotional understanding.
Exactly.
Oh,
But oftentimes that's what she was talking about in her after action review, that the closing schools is she missed the emotional understanding of it.
Yeah.
Listening to her, I bet you she's a great superintendent, super clear, organized, I got it all set up. I'm ready to go. We're going to do this and this to close the school in an efficient manner. And what I thought was the tension point there, what I wanted to ask her was fascinating that you missed the grieving part, right? That you missed the grief that people felt, while at the same time, she's very clear now, maybe it wasn't then, but now that this is the community center. This is where people gather. This is people have been married in that gym. People have all that
memorials.
Kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So if that's true, if you know that, then I'm surprised that the grief surprised you. That's the thing that I'm interested in knowing. And to me, that's the dilemma sometimes, I think, as leaders, is our brains get hardwired to solve the problem.
Yes,
without
exactly. I think you just answered the question. I think she herself was surprised because she's likely had an entire career where she's attended to the emotional side of decision making, the emotional side of teaching and learning. The emotions are super important within a school structure.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you've been given a task to do. And so task completion, the steps, the checklist, all those pieces, the pausing was a real good learning experience, although as painful as it probably was for her. And a grid resource for everyone else who right now, I'm reading the national papers right now, and they're all having the same sort of like revelation. School districts are seeing declining enrollment, and not because of charters and vouchers. To some extent, there is that. And it's also because there's just a decline in our population. And so communities are either growing or they're shrinking. There's very few that are sort of maintaining a status quo.
In doing this, I just was in a rural school, rural K-8, and it was clearly once its own system and has consolidated with a system that is literally 20-minute drive away, right? So the high school, when they go to high school after this K-8, it's a longer drive to school. And that she was trying to figure out the master schedule. And what is clear is she was solving the problem without having it. But she was having a hard time holding her central idea about what's good for kids while navigating everybody's interest, like all of the teachers' interests about, well, I think it'd be better if I didn't teach math at that period, but rather this person. And she's like, oh, that makes sense. But that person said this, and this person wants that. And and we're losing the teacher who taught science and band. So now we have a teacher who teaches language arts and band.
And I recognize you got a music teacher who teaches at the elementary, and it would really be better if they taught kindergarten the last block, because man, those kids are just dragging at the end of the day. So let's just give them music at that time. Well, we also need them at the high school. Oh, well, can they still do music?
Yeah, exactly. So she was sort of trying to figure out and she had figured it out. She had figured out the actual plan, but it became clear. I'm like, oh, we've leaned too far into what works for these adults who are really smart and thoughtful and everything, but and caring and want to do what's best for kids. And we lost what's best for kids. And they're struggling academically. And I'm like, oh, this whole structure doesn't even work as an elementary, secondary store. The problem is you're trying to run a regular secondary school that won't work. And so
I know you're
what if
helping
we
them. And I bet you their state association of rural educators would probably be
Yes.
a good source for them as well. So put them in touch with Melissa.
Yeah.
So,
I will.
listen,
I will.
I do think this is a great episode, one that will resonate for so many, even in larger districts, as they are trying to figure out the same kind of issues, because it truly doesn't matter if you're a rural, suburban, or urban. Many of the situations are very similar. And to your point, attending to the affective, the emotional piece of things will make you effective in doing your jobs.
You've been listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership podcast. Thank you, Peter. I'll see you next week.
I will see you next week. Bye.